So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another mechanical video. In this video, I'm going to be helping my daughter replace the door lock actuator on this 2001 Ford F250. And being as this is her truck now, I made her help because she wanted it fixed. So the reason we replaced this actuator is it was intermittently working. Sometimes it would go just fine, and other times it would only go about halfway. And if you went to lock, unlock a couple times in a row really quick, it would unlatch. So as soon as we took this door panel apart, I actually saw something that was probably the whole entire problem with this lock actuator not working. But since I had already ordered the part on Amazon and I already had it apart, we went ahead and put the new one on anyways. I'm also going to go over some other things like the inside door handle if that breaks on you or the cable goes bad. I'm going to do a light overview on how those come apart. So one other quick side note, guys, is even though I'm doing the driver's door on the front, this video will help you out for any of the doors on this vehicle because even the rear ones, it's pretty much the same process as the front. So Ford did use this same actuator on several different models around this same year, and actually the concept of how to take the door panel on and off is about the same as well. So even if you don't have this same vehicle, this video might help you out if you have something in similar time frame as far as Ford vehicle. Now keep in mind, this is strictly a replacement video. I don't do any diagnostic in this. Because my door lock actuator was going up and down intermittently, I knew all the connections and the electrical was good. This is strictly going to be a video on how to replace the part. So I ended up getting my door lock actuators off of Amazon. They come in 4-packs and 2-packs. Make sure if you're only trying to buy one that you do specify driver's or passenger side because they are different. So here's some other components I found on Amazon that I'm going to lightly touch on in this video as well. So basically what was happening with this truck is you would hit the button to unlock the door and the door lock knob would go up about halfway. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't, but basically that's why we are replacing it, and I'm going to show you how it's done. So let's get to it. So right here we're just unclipping the piece of trim that covers the side mirrors. That just pulls off. There's also one of those clips that holds the piece of trim that holds all your switches. You just unclip that by leveraging it up a little bit at the front. Then pull it towards the front of the door a little bit and it'll come up and out. Then remove the pigtails off of the switches. Each one of those just has a plastic clip that you depress and then wiggle and pull until they pop out of the socket. You do want to be careful with these pigtails because this vehicle is getting over 20 years old and plastic tends to get dry and brittle. I used a flathead screwdriver to pop out the lens for the door light. Then I used a 9/32 socket to remove the 2 screws that hold the door panel in place. One is underneath that lens that we took off, and the other one is underneath the piece of trim that holds all the switches. Once you get those 2 screws out, all you have to do is lift up on the door panel and pull it up and off the vehicle, making sure that your wiring harnesses go through the panel as you do that, and then you will need to do about a 1/4 turn on the pigtail socket that holds the light bulb underneath the lens in order to remove it from the door panel. I pulled back the inner covering that's on the door. Hopefully yours is still there. They tend to disappear because people aren't very careful with them, but I do recommend if it is still there to be careful with it because it's basically an added layer of insulation and just helps deaden out some of the noise from the door during driving. Then I removed the door lock rod. There's a plastic clip that holds this and you just push it off of the rod and then you can pull it out. Then I loosened up the 3 Torx screws that held the latching mechanism to the door. Once I removed those 3 screws, I took out the single bolt that holds the window rail in place, and you will need to remove this bolt in order to get the latching mechanism past the window rail so you can replace the actuator. This is the part of the project where you have to use a little finesse and patience because there's a couple plastic clips that still need to be removed, and these plastic clips get dry and brittle, so you do need to be careful with them. I like to use a 90-degree pick to remove the first one. This is the threaded rod that goes from the outer door handle to the latching mechanism. Using that 90-degree pick, you can get behind the locking mechanism and pull it a little bit away from the clip to unlatch it. Then all you have to do is pull that threaded rod right out from the rest of the plastic clip. The other rod that needs to be removed is actually attached to your key lock on the outside of the door. I used a pair of these spreader pliers to remove this rod, but you can just kind of leverage in a flathead screwdriver to spread the tabs so you can pull the rod out of this clip. I got the best footage I could of this. I know it's kind of hard to see, but basically I'm spreading the two tabs and then pulling the rod out from that clip. You will also need to remove a couple clips that hold the cable that goes from the inside door handle to the latching mechanism. One of these was already broken on this truck, and I think that's what led to the door actuator failure, and I'll explain that later in this video. Basically, you just collapse these with a pair of pliers and then push them through the door in order to remove them. Once you do that, you should be able to get the latching mechanism around the window rail and out through the side of the door so you can replace the actuator. It's also a good idea to snap some pictures of the way the rods look inside the door before you remove all of them, so you have that for a reference going back together. It is kind of easy to get a rod on the wrong side of another rod or something, and then your mechanisms will not work, or they'll get bound up on each other and create extra friction and wear out parts sooner than they should. So since this latch assembly is out of the door and easy to see, I'm going to label some of the other components for you that you might need to replace depending on what's wrong with your vehicle. So right here is the door ajar switch, basically telling you whether your door is open or closed. So if that's not working right for you, all you do is unplug that, give it a twist, and it will come out, and then twist the new one in and plug it back in. This is the cable assembly that runs from your interior door handle to the latching mechanism to open and close the door, and that basically pops in and out of place if you need to replace it. So right here I removed the electrical pigtail from the actuator. The locking tab on that pigtail is actually broken. Once again, these things get very dry and brittle. To remove the actuator from the latching mechanism, you will need a pick or a small screwdriver to leverage the locking tab towards the actuator in order to remove it. Basically what you are doing is collapsing this little tab in order to get it out of the latching mechanism. Once getting that off, I compared my new actuator to my old one to make sure it was the same. You can see this one moves a little bit more freely, meaning it was getting kind of worn out. To install the new actuator, all you have to do is line it up on the two sets of rails basically and slide it into position, making sure that little rod goes into the latching mechanism. And then make sure that it pops into position and that locking tab holds it in place so it can't walk off. Once you get that in place, go ahead and pop in your electrical pigtail on the actuator. Now, since my locking tab was broken and it won't hold itself on there, I did use a little bit of RTV silicone on the side of it. So once that dries, it just acts as its own little latching mechanism. I don't like to use a super glue because then if I have to take this apart again for whatever reason, you're almost positively going to destroy that pigtail. Then I went ahead and started sliding that latching mechanism back into position, making sure to take the exact same path that I took it out. I can't emphasize how critical that is as far as making sure you didn't twist it a different way or turn it upside down as you install it and bind up your cables or rods. Once I got it up in position, I went ahead and started 2 of the Torx screws just to hold it in position. I didn't tighten them down because I wanted to make sure I had everything in correctly before taking the time to do that. I connected the inside door lock rod to the latching mechanism and popped the plastic clip over the rod. So as I said earlier in this video, one of the plastic clips that holds the cable from the inside door handle to the latching mechanism was broken, and therefore it was rubbing up against the rod. This could have caused extra friction and lead to the failure of that actuator, so I took a zip tie, wrapped it through the door, around the cable, and back out the door, and zip tied it to itself to hold that cable tight to the door so it did not rub that door lock rod. This actually could have been the entire problem and why that door lock actuator was intermittently working, but since I was in there, I went ahead and replaced the door lock actuator anyways. Once making sure everything looked correct and that none of the rods were binding on each other, I went ahead and tightened down the 3 Torx screws into the latching mechanism to hold it in place. I went ahead and attached the rod from the latching mechanism to the outdoor key tumbler, and that just snaps into place through that tab. Usually you can see a wear pattern on the threaded rod that comes from the outside door handle, and I just line that up again, push it into place, and then snap the locking clip over to hold it. Once you get all the rods hooked up, it's a good idea to either open and close the door and make sure everything works, or in this case, I'm just using a screwdriver to close the latching mechanism and open it back up and make sure everything works as it should before taking the time to put the door panel back on. It really sucks when you get it all back together and realize one of the rods is binding or not latching properly and you have to take it all back apart. Once verifying that everything was working properly, I went ahead and put the bolt that holds the window rail back in position. Usually you can see the wear pattern on the door of exactly where it needs to go. Then I went ahead and put the inner door covering back over the door. You should be able to push in the little inserts back into the door and should hold it in place for the most part. It does act as kind of a sticker, but that usually gets worn out over time, especially when it's this old. Then grab your door panel and go up over the inside door lock and then down into position. Make sure you grab your wiring harnesses and pull them into place and hook up your light that goes underneath the lens. Once you line that door panel, it just kind of pushes in and down until it lines up with the two screw holes that hold it. Then go ahead and put those screws back in using that 9/32 socket. Be careful while installing that top screw. It really sucks when you drop it inside the door panel and you have to take it all back apart. Then go ahead and pop your lens back in. It just slides into the one side and pops into place. Then go ahead and grab your piece of trim that holds your switches and connect the harnesses back up. Each one of these will only go into a specific slot, so you don't have to worry about getting them switched. You should hear the little detent of the plastic clip locking into place on each one of those switches. Before placing the trim into the door panel, I like to make sure all the switches are working correctly. It's a good idea at this time to turn the key on to your vehicle and make sure the window goes up and down properly to make sure that that window rail did not come out of place on the top side while you were getting the door latching mechanism around it. Then go ahead and hook the back side of that piece of trim in place and then push down on the front of it to snap it into place. We went ahead and verified everything was working one more time, and then we put that final piece of trim over the side mirror and just snapped it into place. And that's pretty much all there is to it, guys. The other thing I ended up doing is I actually thought I had gotten my cable twisted, so I'm going to show you how to really quick take out your inside door handle and put it back in if need be. So there's two nuts that hold this inside door handle to the door, so I just removed those. Then the outer handle will come off, then this little bezel, and then you can push the handle mechanism through the back side of the door and bring it out through the bottom of the door. Once you replace either the cable or the mechanism, whatever you need to, then you just push it back into the door. The bezel will help hold the studs so you can get the door handle itself put on and the nuts started on the door handle, and then just tighten those back up. So because of the way this door handle fits, it's a little bit of a pain to get the nuts started on that door handle. So what I like to use is just get a plastic bag and stuff it in a socket and then put the nut in, and that will help hold that nut so you can kind of use your tool to help get it started and then just tighten those down. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.